My mother slapped me in front of 200 people at my father's 65th birthday gala. What she didn't know was that 3 of those people were recording. One of them was the Attorney General of South Carolina, and the leather folder under my arm had been in the state's evidence system since 6 o'clock that morning. My name is Harper Ellison. 11 years ago, this family threw me out. Tonight I came back not to be let in. The ballroom sat on the second floor of a hotel that had stood in Charleston since 1887, and my mother chose it because the ceilings were 22 feet high, and she believed that mattered. The fans turned slowly overhead, the way they do in old Southern rooms. It smelled like magnolia and bourbon and the particular perfume of women who buy it in Paris and mention it later. A string quartet played near the windows, oysters, a raw bar, an ice sculpture of the family crest. $300,000 for one evening. Nobody in that room asked where it came from. That was the entire design. I did not sneak in. I had an invitation. It came to my office, addressed to Harper Ellison, because the guest list had been bought from a data firm that sorts by income and zip code, and nobody on my mother's committee checked the last names against the one they had spent 11 years pretending not to know. My mother paid $4,000 for that list. It was the best money she ever spent, and she spent it on me. I was 30 steps into the room when the music stopped mattering. "How dare you!" Her voice went through the strings like a knife through a curtain. People turned before they understood why. My mother came across that floor the way she had crossed every floor of her life, chin level. Shoulders back, the crowd opening for her out of habit. She was 63 and she moved like the room belonged to her. And until that night, it always had. Her hand came up. The rings caught the light. The sound arrived first. It was flatter than I expected, a single hard clap. The ceiling swallowed almost immediately. The feeling came after, in stages, heat, then pressure, then the slow spreading ache along the jaw. My head turned to the side. A pin came loose and hair fell across my eye. I did not raise my hand to my face. I did not drop the folder. 3 phones came up. Not teenagers. There were no teenagers in that room. A man in his 60s at the second table lifted his phone without standing, holding it low, the way people do when they know something is wrong and want a record of it. A woman in a green dress raised hers openly, and by the kitchen door, a waiter balancing a tray of empty glasses on one hand had already begun filming with the other. My father reached me 11 seconds later. I counted, because I have spent my adult life counting things people would rather I didn't. He did not ask if I was hurt. He did not look at my face. He took my elbow not hard, but the way you take hold of a chair you intend to move. "There's a service corridor behind the bar," he said. "Go out through the kitchen. Don't do this to us again." Behind him stood my sister. Sloan wore our grandmother's pearls, the ones that were supposed to come to me, and her smile had not moved a millimeter. She practiced that smile in a mirror when she was 15. I know, because I was in the room. Then the hotel manager arrived, and everything began to come apart. He was not there to remove me. He was there to protect his employer. "Ma'am," he said to me, "I need to know if you want to press charges. I have to write this up either way." My mother turned on him. "There's nothing to write up. There's video, ma'am." 4 words. And I watched something happen in my mother's face that I had never seen in 35 years, a hesitation, half a second long, while a woman who had managed every story this family ever told understood she was not managing this one. Past her shoulder, through the open doors, 2 uniformed state troopers stood in the lobby with their hands folded in front of them. My mother had mentioned the governor's security detail twice that week. The way other women say the name of a designer, my mother thought the troopers were a compliment. She had spent 40 years learning which men in a room mattered, and she had never once learned to ask why they had come. Private security started toward me, 2 men in dinner jackets, unhurried. Before either of them reached me, a chair scraped across the stone floor. Governor Wade Calloway stood up and buttoned his jacket. He didn't look at me. He looked at my father, and for the first time in my life, I watched my father's face do something I had never seen it do. He was afraid to understand why. You have to go back 11 years, not to the night they threw me out, to the afternoon 3 weeks before it, when I asked a question about a number on a page. There was a rule in our house that nobody ever said out loud. Only one daughter could be the good one at a time. It was not permanent. You held the position until you cost them something money. An evening, an explanation, and then it moved. Nobody explained it. You learned it the way you learn where a floor creaks. In every portrait we ever took, Sloane stood between our parents. I stood at the edge, half a step back close enough to be in the frame, far enough to be cropped out later. When I was 15, my mother had one reprinted for a foundation brochure. I wasn't in it. I asked her why. She said the composition was cleaner without me. I was 31 before I understood she had told me the truth. There are 3 moments I go back to. None were dramatic. That is what people get wrong about families like mine. Nothing dramatic happens. It accumulates. I was 9. Sloane was 5. She pulled our grandmother's cut crystal vase off the sideboard, and it came apart on the floor in a sound I still hear. My mother walked in, looked at the glass, and said, "Harper, you know better than to leave her alone in here." I sat on the stairs for 2 hours. Nobody asked Sloane anything, and by dinner it had become the story Harper wasn't watching. I was 22. Sloane dropped her spring semester at Sewanee 11 days in. My mother told the Charleston women it was a gap year. She said it like it had been planned since Sloane was born. That same spring, I changed my major from communications to accounting, and my father told his golf partners his older daughter still didn't know what she wanted. One daughter took a year off, the other one was lost. I was 20, Sloane was 16, needed a permission slip signed for a field trip, and our parents were in Napa. She practiced my signature on a legal pad at the kitchen table until she got it right. She showed everyone. My father laughed and said she had a future in the family business. She always curled the last letter of my name, because she thought a curl looked adult. I did not think about that curl for 15 years. There was also a name that stopped being said. I was 9, under the kitchen island with a book. The way children are when adults forget they exist. My grandmother and mother were talking about my father's younger brother. Peter had signed something at the company. That was the whole phrase, signed something. Within a month he had left the state. My grandmother said he had a problem with drinking, and she said it kindly, which somehow made it worse. After that, Peter Ashgrove was simply not at dinner, not banished, not discussed, just absent, the way a chair is absent once you carry it out of a room, until nobody remembers it was there. I did not think about Peter Ashgrove again for 26 years. When I finally did, it was because a forensic accountant in Columbia asked me who he was. People assume my mother was greedy. She wasn't, not about money. Diane Ashgrove was greedy about being looked at. She knew every donor's children by name and which colleges they'd gotten into. She wrote thank you notes by hand, on heavy stock, always within 2 days. At the podium, she could put her hand flat against her collarbone and let her voice catch on the 3rd sentence about a woman sleeping in her car with 2 kids. and 200 checkbooks came out at once. Here is what took me 20 years to understand. She was extraordinarily good at it. It was not a performance laid over something else. There was nothing underneath it. And a woman who is that good at being believed does not need to lie. Often, she only needs to lie once, about the right thing, to the right room. When I was 22, they gave me a title. Assistant Secretary of the Ashgrove Family Renewal Foundation. No salary, no signature authority, no vote, no desk. What it came with was a photograph 3 generations on the steps of a building. My grandmother seated, both daughters flanking my father. They gave me the title because a foundation run by a father and 1 daughter photographs like a business. A father and 2 daughters photographs like a family. Then came an April afternoon. I was in the foundation office waiting for my father to finish a call. There was a printout on the credenza. I picked it up because I have never been able to leave a page of numbers alone. 1 line, $1,800,000, moved out of the Youth Housing Fund into a consulting company I had never heard of. I asked him about it. He was kind. That is what I remember how kind he was. He didn't tell me to mind my business. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "That's a good eye, sweetheart." Then he asked if I'd thought about law school out of state. 3 weeks later, I learned I was pregnant. For 11 years, I believed the pregnancy was what ended everything. It wasn't. It was just the first excuse that arrived after the question. They did it in my father's study, the room where things became official. There were 3 documents laid out on the desk, squared to the edge, the way he squared everything. The first was a closed adoption file, not a brochure, not an option file. The receiving family's name was already typed in. Their county was typed in. There was a line at the bottom with a small penciled X beside it, waiting for me. The second was an amendment to the family trust. My father had signed it the day before. I want you to sit with that. The day before, whatever I said in that room, whatever I agreed to or refused, had already been decided while I was asleep in a bedroom down the hall. The third was a settlement agreement with a confidentiality clause, and clipped to it, a one-way ticket to Lisbon. My mother said I could come home once the situation had been handled. She used the word situation 4 times. She never once used the word baby, and she never once used the word you. I said no. That was all. I did not argue. I did not cry in front of them. I did not make a speech. I stood up, picked up my bag, and walked out the front door. I didn't slam anything. I remember being surprised by how quiet it was. I think I expected my own life ending to make more noise. People imagine being disowned looks like a door closing behind you. It doesn't. In America, it looks like paperwork. And it arrives on a delay, and it finds you in public. My spring tuition payment was reversed 11 days later. The registrar's office told me by phone, politely, twice, because I asked her to repeat it. The insurance took longer to find me. I was 5 months along. At the front desk of an OB office off Rutledge Avenue. The girl behind the desk was maybe 20. She swiped it twice, then a 3rd time, and then she stopped looking at the card and started looking at me. She said, "This has been terminated, ma'am. Do you want to reschedule?" I said no. I said I'd figure it out. Then I sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes. Because I had nowhere to drive to, that would make it not be true. Meanwhile, a story was being built about me, and I was not in the room for it. The first version was simple. Sloan told our cousins I had taken money and run. It was clean. It was ugly. And it had a flaw theft invites questions. Where did she take it from? How much? Why didn't you call anyone? So within a year, there was a second version, softer, sadder, delivered with a hand on the forearm. Harper had a problem with pills. Harper wasn't well. Harper couldn't be around the family right now. A thief invites questions. An addict invites sympathy for everyone except the addict. It was the more generous lie, and it was the more effective one. And I have never once believed my sister chose it by accident. Here is what those 11 years actually looked like. 7 months in the laundry room of a friend from my old job, on a twin mattress wedged between a dryer and a shelf of detergent, night shifts scanning case files at a legal records company, 11 to 7, because they paid $1 more after midnight and nobody talked to you. Community college in the mornings, 2 hours of sleep in a parked car between the two. Ren was born on a Tuesday in February at 4:51 in the morning. There was nobody in the waiting room. I have made my peace with that, mostly. I went into accounting because numbers do not lie and do not have a favorite child. Then I went further, because I found out they can be made to lie, and somebody has to be the one who catches it. I sat for my fraud examiner certification at 29, passed on the first attempt, and cried in a stairwell afterward for reasons that had very little to do with the exam. I did not choose forensic accounting because of what my family did. I chose it because in a ledger, every dollar has to be somewhere. There is no version of the story where a number simply decided to leave. Somebody moved it, and the moving leaves a mark. And I wrote letters. I wrote 46 letters in 11 years. Birthdays, her first steps. The morning she lost a tooth in a pancake and cried. Not because it hurt, but because she thought she had ruined breakfast. 6 came back marked return to sender. The other 40 never came back at all, which was worse because it meant somebody had opened them. I stopped at 46, not because I gave up, because Ren was 7, and she climbed onto the chair beside me and asked who I was writing to. And I could not think of a single honest answer that would not teach my daughter how to beg. That was the year I learned the thing. It took me a decade to say out loud, forgiveness and access are not the same door. You can stop being angry at someone and still never hand them a key. 6 months before the gala, a woman came to my office with a banker's box on her lap. She was 58, in a gray cardigan, and she kept the box on her knees the entire time she sat in my waiting room. She did not set it on the floor. She did not set it on the chair beside her. 40 minutes, holding a box. Her name was Rita Doyle. For 9 years, she had been the finance director of the Ashgrove Family Renewal Foundation. People want whistleblowers to arrive on fire. They almost never do. Rita came because of a scheduling problem. The foundation's largest donor had put a condition on his next commitment, beginning with the coming fiscal year. The books would be audited by one of the Big Four instead of the 4-person firm that had signed off on them since 2014. Somebody had to assemble 9 years of records for handover. That somebody was Rita. I wasn't brave, she told me. I was just the one holding the box when the music stopped. She had sat inside those ledgers for 9 years and never seen a thing. It was only when she had to lay them out for a stranger that she saw what they looked like from the outside. She reported it internally, in writing, the way you are supposed to. 2 days later, Sloan accused her of misappropriating funds and terminated her. Nobody called the police. That is the detail I want you to hold on to. If you genuinely believe your finance director has stolen from a charity, you call the police. They did not call the police, because a police report generates an investigation, and an investigation generates a file, and a file has to be handed to somebody. I told Rita no. I told her before she finished her second sentence, Conflict of interest, not a technicality, a disqualification. My parents ran the organization. My sister ran the money. I could not touch it. Not as an examiner, not as a consultant, not as a favor. I gave her 2 names of people who could, and I stood up to walk her out. Then she said, "There's one more thing in here," and she took out a single sheet. A wire authorization form, $1,800,000, out of the Youth Housing Fund, dated May 12th, 11 years earlier, signed Harper Ashgrove. My sister used to practice my signature at the kitchen table when we were teenagers. She always curled the last letter because she thought it looked more adult. She was 16. Everyone laughed. I looked at that curl for a long time, long enough that Rita asked if I needed water. I want to walk you through the arithmetic slowly, because it took me about 90 seconds to do it in that room. And those 90 seconds rearranged 11 years of my life. The transfer was dated May 12th. They put me on a plane list on May 29th. I had asked my father about that number on April 21st. 3 weeks between the question and the transfer, 2 weeks between the transfer and the exile. They did not throw me out because I was pregnant. The pregnancy was a gift. It arrived exactly when they needed a reason that no one in Charleston would question, and it let them do in 1 week what they had been trying to figure out how to do since April. They threw me out because I could read, and once you see that, the rest of it turns over too. The addiction story was never gossip. It was infrastructure. If anyone ever found the missing money, there was already a daughter in the file who had disappeared under a cloud, whose signature was on the paperwork, and whom no one would believe. They didn't erase me. They filed me. 11 years. In a drawer, in case they needed somebody to be guilty. Every unreturned call. Every cousin who stopped inviting me. My mother giving speeches about vulnerable young women while 40 of my letters sat opened in a house I was not allowed to enter. None of it was cruelty for its own sake. It was maintenance. You have to keep a scapegoat plausible, or the story stops working. People ask me what I felt. I have thought about it for a long time. And the honest answer is that I felt organized. Every unanswered letter, every rumor, every cousin who stopped calling it, all stopped being a series of cruelties and became a single design. And a design can be traced. I did not shout. I did not cry in front of Rita Doyle. I sat back down and opened my laptop, and I asked her whether the 2016 grant schedules were in the box, and she said they were, and something in her shoulders came down about an inch. Then I closed the laptop, because I already knew what I was going to do, and I knew I was not going to like it. I still refused the case. I refused it harder than before, and that decision is the only reason any of this held up. But I picked up the phone, and I did not call my parents. And I did not call a reporter. I called the Charities Bureau at the Office of the Attorney General. The Charities Bureau took the call seriously within 4 minutes, which tells you something about what was already in their inbox. What happened next is the part nobody puts in a movie. I refused to serve as the examiner, in writing. I referred Rita to an attorney in Columbia with no connection to my family and no reason to be gentle. I delivered certified copies of every document in that box, logged and receipted. I filed a written disclosure of my relationship to the subjects of the complaint, notarized. Then I stepped out of the way and became a witness. Every instinct I had wanted to be the one to open the ledgers. I had waited 11 years and I wanted my hands on it. Instead, I signed a disclosure form and I stepped back. Because I already knew what my father's lawyers would say about a woman investigating her own family, and I was not going to hand them the only argument they had. That was the hardest thing I did in this entire story. Nobody claps for it. It happens in a conference room, and it takes 9 minutes. Then I waited 6 months while other people did the work. The state's forensic accountants traced donations through consulting agreements, vendor invoices, and 3 shell entities registered in Delaware. They did not find $1.8 million. They found $14.2 million over 9 years. It came out of a women's shelter, a scholarship program, a domestic violence hotline, and an emergency housing grant meant to keep families out of their cars in January. Sloan signed most of the transfers, my father signed the final approvals, and my mother supplied the thing money cannot buy the story: edited photographs, borrowed furniture staged for one afternoon of shooting, ribbon cuttings for buildings that never opened, attended by people who believed they were opening them. I know what some of you are thinking, because it is the first thing I thought. What about my signature? What about May 12th? The 2015 forgery could not be charged. It could be proved. Prosecutors call it evidence of scheme and intent, the first move in a pattern that never stopped. My name wasn't the crime anymore. My name was the fingerprint. In the 9th week, one of the state accountants called me. She sounded confused, not excited, which is how you can tell someone has found something real. "Ma'am, who is Peter Ashgrove?" I said he was my uncle. I said he had a drinking problem and left the state when I was 9 and died in Arizona in 2019. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, his signature is on 4 transfers in 2004, and according to his employment record, he had already been terminated from the company 11 months before the first one. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen, not because I was grieving a man I barely remembered, because I finally understood that what had been done to me was not personal. It was a procedure. My family had a procedure for what to do with a person who noticed something. I was not the first one they ran it on. I was just the first one who came back. Before I tell you what happened in that ballroom, I want to ask you something. And I want you to actually answer, because I think a lot of you already know the answer. In your family, was there one person who got blamed for everything? Not the one who did the most wrong, the one it was easiest to blame, because blaming them kept the peace at dinner. Tell me who it was. First name only. I have a feeling this comment section is about to be full of people who thought they were the only one. Now, the governor, Wade Calloway, had agreed months earlier to announce a state housing partnership with the foundation at my father's gala. It was a photograph both sides wanted. When the preliminary findings reached his office, he canceled the partnership quietly, no press release, no statement, 9 days before the event. And then he left his name on the guest list, because the Attorney General asked him to. Understand what he was and wasn't. Calloway did not investigate anyone. Governors don't. Charity fraud in this state belongs to the Attorney General. And Naomi Fairbanks was elected on her own ballot line and did not answer to him. He was not the sword. He was the witness, the one person in that room my parents could not dismiss as bitter or unstable. The rest happened before any of us put on our shoes. At 6 o'clock the morning of the gala, a sealed warrant was executed at the foundation office on Broad Street. The server was imaged. The paper files were sealed and inventoried. It took 2 hours. And nobody in my family was notified, because that is how sealed warrants work. By the time the string quartet tuned up that evening, everything my family planned to destroy that night had been in a state evidence room for 12 hours. They just didn't know it yet. I did not go to that gala to expose anyone. There was nothing left to expose. I went because I wanted to be in the room, once, standing up, with my own name, Gerald. Take your hand off her arm. My father laughed the way men laugh when they're buying 3 seconds. Governor, this is a family matter. The state withdrew from its partnership with your foundation 9 days ago, Calloway said. I kept my name on tonight's guest list because the Attorney General asked me to. She's at table 4. She's been there since 7. 200 people turned toward table 4 at once. Naomi Fairbanks put down her napkin and stood. She did not raise her voice. She said, Mr. Ashgrove, in the flat, unhurried tone of a woman who has read the file and is only here to watch you learn that she has. A young attorney from the Charities Bureau came forward with an envelope, a document preservation order, and a civil investigative demand, served by hand, and my father had to sign for it. He signed for it. That was the thing I will remember longest. My father, in a tuxedo, at his own birthday party, holding a pen and signing to acknowledge receipt. My mother did what she had done for 40 years. She turned it into a misunderstanding. General Fairbanks, you've been misled. Harper has been unwell for a very long time. She has a history. I opened the folder and took out 1 page. Is this the history you mean? I asked. According to your foundation, I authorized a transfer of $1.8 million in May of 2015. That month, I was 24 years old, 6 weeks pregnant, uninsured, and living in a friend's laundry room. I held no operational role, I had no signature authority, and I have never in my life signed my name with a curl on the last letter. Anyone can print a piece of paper, Sloan said, and that is the moment it left my hands. At table 3, a man in his 70s took out his phone. His name was Walter Hines. He had funded a housing program every year since 2011 and had a plaque in his office to prove it. He was not looking for a scandal. He was looking for a fact, and in this country, the tax return of a public charity is a fact anybody can pull up on a phone. He didn't shout. He read for maybe 90 seconds. Then he said, to no one in particular, it says the shelter opened in 2019. He looked up. I drove past that building in March. There's plywood on the windows. 4 phones, then 10, then 30, glowing at the tables like a tide coming in. A woman near the bar pulled up her own donation receipt and compared it to a schedule of transfers, and I watched her hand go to her mouth when she saw her money had left the fund 48 hours after she gave it. Somebody said a number out loud, somebody else said a program name, then said, "That's mine, that's the one I sponsored." The quartet stopped playing. Nobody told them to. They stopped the way musicians do when the room has changed underneath them. Nobody in that room was destroyed by me. They were destroyed by the audience they had spent 30 years buying. Every guest at that gala had been trained to believe the Ashgrove name. It turned out the only thing more dangerous than a room full of people who trust you is a room full of people who just found out why. My mother moved toward the screen set up for my father's tribute video and said, "Turn that off. Turn all of it off." But there was nothing on the screen. Nobody had projected anything. No presentation, no slideshow, no ambush. There was a room full of people with phones, and my mother had no strategy for that, because in 40 years, nobody had ever fact-checked her while she was still standing there. I handed Fairbanks 1 more page, a printout of an internal email, header and timestamp redacted, because that is how documents are produced. Sloan glanced at it and laughed, short and contemptuous. That email was sent at 2 in the morning, not in the afternoon. You can't even fake it properly. The room went quiet in a way I have never heard a room go quiet. The timestamp had been redacted. There was no time on the page. There were exactly 2 people alive who knew when that message had been sent. and one of them was standing under a chandelier in a borrowed necklace, explaining it to the Attorney General. My father's lawyer took 2 steps away from him. Just 2. In that room, it might as well have been a mile. Then, my father did the worst thing I have ever seen a parent do. He looked at Sloane, half a second, no more, but everyone facing that way saw it. Then he turned back to Fairbanks and said, in a voice with the command taken out of it, "General, my daughter Sloane has had operational control of the foundation since 2016. He fed her to the room, in one sentence, in front of everyone. And I watched my sister's face do the arithmetic she had been avoiding her entire life. She had never been the favorite. She had been the useful one. And useful is a position you hold until you cost them something. I walked out of that ballroom on my own feet, and nobody clapped. That is the part people get wrong when they imagine a night like this. Nobody was arrested, nobody was dragged out, there was no music swell. There were 300 people in evening clothes quietly calling their own accountants, and a caterer standing by the dessert table with nothing to do, and a room slowly emptying the way a church empties after bad news. Wren was in the lobby where I had left her, 11 years old, in the good dress, reading on a bench near the coat check because the ballroom was no place for a child, and I had told her 90 minutes. And it had been 110. That is where the woman found me. She was past 70, real pearls, the kind that have been restrung twice. She was waiting for her coat, and she stepped in front of me, and I braced, because I had spent the last hour being spoken to by people who wanted something. She said she had given the foundation money every year since 2011. Then she stood there holding her coat check ticket, and she said something else. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 9 years. I didn't say anything. I have learned that when someone is about to say the true thing, you do not help them. I've always told people she was the difficult one, she said. She looked back toward the ballroom door for a long moment. I've never once asked myself whether she was. She didn't apologize to me. I wasn't hers to apologize to. She took her coat and she went out into the parking lot, and I stood there thinking about a phone, somewhere in another state that was not going to ring tonight, but might, someday, because of a Tuesday in Charleston that had nothing to do with her. In the car, Wren asked how it went. I gave her the version I had been building in my head since the valet stand. Calm, edited, load-bearing walls removed. Grandpa's party had some serious business come up. Some people from the state were there. It's complicated, but nothing bad is going to happen to us. She let me finish the whole thing. She was very patient about it. Then she said, "Mom, I found the letters when I was 9, all 46. They're in the blue box under your winter coats." I kept both hands on the wheel because I did not trust them anywhere else. "You never said anything? You always looked really tired after you talked about them," she said. "So I figured you needed me to not know." My daughter had spent 2 years protecting me from a truth I was working overtime to protect her from. We had both been standing guard at the same door, on opposite sides, and neither of us had thought to knock. We drove a while. Then she asked the only question she ever asked me about them. And it was not, "Are they nice?" And it was not, "Why don't they love us?" Did they ever ask about me? Not to Grandma. Not to be nice. Just did anybody ever ask what I was like? I could have softened it. I had 11 years of practice softening things. "No," I said. "Nobody ever asked." She nodded once and looked out the window. And after about a mile, she said, "Okay, not sad, not angry. The way you close a book you were never really reading." At the last red light before our exit, she fell asleep against the door. And there was a cookie in her hand, wrapped in a cocktail napkin, taken off a tray in the lobby. She had been sitting out there for almost 2 hours. She hadn't eaten since lunch. She had not complained once. Not on the drive over, not in the lobby, not when 90 minutes became 110. She had taken one cookie and saved it. And then she had gotten in the car and asked me how my evening was. I sat in the driveway for a minute with the engine off before I woke her. Rita Doyle called at 11:40. I assumed she wanted to know what had happened, whether Fairbanks had served the order, whether my father had made a scene, whether 9 years of her working life had finally landed somewhere. She didn't ask about any of it. She said, "Is your girl all right?" It was the first time in 11 years that somebody connected to that family had asked about my daughter, and it was a woman who had never met either of us. I said she was asleep. I said she was fine, and then I sat down on the stairs in the dark and cried for about 4 minutes, which was the only crying I did that entire night. And it had nothing to do with my mother. People imagine the moment of vindication feels like winning. It doesn't. It feels like putting down something you had been carrying so long that your arms have forgotten the shape of anything else. I did not feel powerful that night. I felt quiet. And for the first time since I was 24, I was not rehearsing what I would say if they ever asked me to explain myself. 2 envelopes reached my mother's steps that Monday. The first suspended the foundation. The second was a summons misdemeanor battery. Filed by the hotel manager that night. With 3 videos, she texted that afternoon a criminal record at her age would be an unnecessary humiliation. I wrote back one line. "You hit me in front of 200 people. You can explain it to 12. 9 months later, my father and Sloan were indicted wire fraud, conspiracy, falsified records, obstruction. My mother was charged separately with donor misrepresentation and evidence tampering. An indictment is not a conviction, and anyone who says otherwise has never sat through a criminal calendar. The cases took 2.5 years paperwork. Slow, the least interesting thing that happened. The social empire went faster. Within a month, my father lost the chairmanship. The foundation was dissolved under court supervision. 2 charity boards asked my mother to resign, and Sloan sold her condominium. The civil recovery came to $6.2 million, less than half, because the rest had gone into things that cannot be resold parties. Travel, a wedding in Positano, 9 years of looking wealthy. That money finished 2 buildings. Lantern House opened with 19 beds. The second, 8 months later, with 31, 50 beds, out of $14 million. That is the real arithmetic of theft, not a number on an indictment. 50 women who had a place to sleep and every other woman who didn't for 9 years, while my mother cried on cue at a podium about protecting them. My mother wrote once, by hand, on the heavy stock apologizing for the slap, the 3 documents, the 11 years of silence. Then, in the last paragraph, she asked me to state she had acted under my father's direction. Even her apology had an exit. I returned it through her attorney with no note. Not out of cruelty. Some apologize when they understand the damage. Some when the damage reaches them. And only time tells you which. My father never apologized. He sent one message Wren should come see him before it was too late. She said no, and did not need time to think. 2 weeks later, she asked what he looked like now. Not to visit, just to know. I showed her a news photograph. She looked for maybe 4 seconds and handed the phone back. "Okay," she said. "That's enough of that." Children are allowed to be curious about the people who didn't want them. It costs them nothing. It only costs the adult who kept the door closed for good reasons. Sloan took a plea cooperation, restitution, Testimony. She asked to see me once, with counsel present. You knew about the rule, too, she said. Only one of us could be the good one. I knew about it, I said. I just never wanted the job. She asked if we could ever be sisters again. I told her the truth, I don't know. You didn't have to love me, Sloane. You only had to refuse to sign my name. 6 weeks after the indictment, a letter came from Arizona. Callie Ashgrove, 36 Peter's daughter, raised on the story that her father stole from the company. We had never met. We had the same story, 30 years apart, written in the same handwriting. She asked if I would look at his file. I said yes before I finished her letter. I cannot give my uncle his life back, but there is a version of him in a courthouse record that is not true. I know how to prove it, and I have the rest of my life. At the opening of Lantern House, nobody applauded the Ashgrove name. It is not on the building. The women who would live there chose it. Wren painted a blue line down the children's reading room and got most of it on her wrists. Watching her laugh with paint on her hands gave me something no ballroom could prove, that a legacy doesn't have to be inherited. It can be built, honestly, by hand, by people who were never invited. I did not destroy my family. The family they advertised never existed. There was only an arrangement fear, silence, favoritism, and money that belonged to women sleeping in cars. And I'll say this to whoever needs it tonight, because some of you have waited 11 years for permission. Forgiveness and access are not the same door. You are allowed to stop being angry. You are allowed to hope they find peace. And you are still allowed to keep the door locked from your side, not because you're bitter, but because you finally learned what happens when you open it. My daughter is 11. She decided on her own that she didn't want to meet her grandfather, and I respected it because nobody respected a decision of mine at her age. But I lie awake wondering whether respecting her choice took away the only grandparents she will ever have. So tell me honestly, at 11, do you let the child decide? Or is that a decision a parent has no right to hand over? There's no right answer. I've been looking for one ever since. If this story reached something in you tonight, subscribe and tell me in the comments who the blamed one was in your family. Somebody down there will read it and realize they were never the only one.